Hey there, thanks for watching. Today, we begin a new series called Learning to Walk with Jesus. Today's message is When You Don't Fully Understand, But You Stay. This message is based in John chapter 6 from verse 60 to 69. The big idea I want to share with you is this. Discipleship is not built on having all the answers, but on choosing to remain with Jesus when clarity disappears. Why we quit when things get hard. A few years ago, scientists studying habit formation discovered something fascinating. People are far more likely to quit a new habit not when it's painful, but when progress becomes unclear. If results are obvious, we endure, and we endure all the discomfort. If outcomes feel uncertain, motivation collapses. That explains why gym membership spike in January but disappear in February. It explains why people abandon learning instruments, languages, or even relationships. It also explains a great deal about faith. We live in a culture that is obsessed with clarity, immediacy, and measurable outcomes. We like progress charts, step counters, the five-step plan for everything. If something stops making sense or stop producing visible results, we quietly step away. That cultural instinct collides head-on with the invitation of Jesus. John 6 records a moment when following Jesus stops being inspiring and starts being confusing. Not morally offensive, not socially costly, just hard to understand. And many disciples leave. This is not ancient history, this is modern spirituality. The question Jesus asked them is the same one he's asked now. Will you stay when you do not fully understand? First point I'd like to bring to you is this. Discipleship begins when clarity ends. John tells us that many of Jesus' disciples stopped following him. The language is understated, but the moment is seismic. These are people who had seen miracles, heard teaching, and experienced community. Some were more interested in material gain, the loaves of bread, than letting Jesus be the master of their lives. Some were completely satisfied with a form of religion devoid of commitment. Some, particularly Judas, saw the real cost of discipleship, the holiness of heart. Yet, when Jesus speaks about himself as the bread of life, when he refused to simplify or soften his words, they step back. Jesus turns to the 12 and asks a haunting question. You do not want to leave too, do you? Peter's answer is not polished theology. It is raw allegiance. Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Bill Hall famously wrote that discipleship is not about making decisions, but about forming lives. In Conversion and Discipleship, his book, he argues that modern Christianity often stops at belief and never moves into sustained following. Peter shows us that sustained following looks like it is not certainty, it is loyalty. Ignatius of Antioch once wrote, it is better to keep silence and be than to speak and not to be. In other words, faith is not proven by having the right explanations, but by remaining embodied and present. Discipleship is participation in God's story, not mastery of God's information. When clarity fades, story remains, relationship remains, presence remains. For unchurched people, this mattered deeply. Christianity is often presented as a machine with all the answers. But Jesus never promised total understanding. He promised life. Discipleship begins where clarity ends because trust can only grow where control is released. That brings us to the second point of this message. Staying is a spiritual practice. Peter's response is not emotional bravado. It is practiced posture. To whom shall we go? Is not resignation. It is discernment. John Wesley understood this deeply. He insisted that faith was not a momentary experience, but a lifelong journey shaped by practice, habits, and community. Wesley famously said, "The Bible knows nothing of solitary religion. Staying is rarely a solo act. Staying requires structure, community, rhythm, worship when feelings lag, prayer when words fail, showing up when enthusiasm fades." John Chrysostom preached that the church is not a museum of saints, but a hospital for sinners. Hospitals are places people stay, not places they abandon because healing takes time. Thomas A. Kempis wrote in The Imitation of Christ, "Do not seek rest in outward things. Seek rest in the ordering of your heart." Staying is the low reordering of our hearts towards God, even when our minds are unsettled. Culturally, we leave when things get uncomfortable. Spiritually, growth often begins precisely there. Discipleship is learning to live faithfully within God's mission to the world. That learning happens through patience, not immediacy, through endurance, not escapism. For many of us, staying does not mean staying in church attendance only. It means staying emotionally present in marriage, staying engaged in prayer, staying honest in doubt, staying connected when retreat feels easier. Spiritual maturity is not measured by intensity, but by perseverance. Let me say this again. Spiritual maturity is not measured by intensity, but by perseverance. The third point I would like to bring to you today is this. Staying is how we are formed. Augustine once said, "If you believe what you like in the gospel and reject what you do not like, it is not the gospel you believe, but yourself." That statement feels confrontational, but is actually pastoral. It reveals how formation works. When we stay only while things align with our preference, we remain unchanged. When we stay through tension, discomfort, and mystery, we are reshaped. Discipleship always leads to transformation or it leads to nowhere. Transformation requires time spent under influence. You cannot be formed by someone you leave. Peter does not yet understand the cross. He does not yet grasp resurrection, but staying positions him to be transformed by both. This is deeply hopeful for anyone who feels intimidated by theology. Jesus never said, "Understand everything and follow me." He said, "Follow me and you will understand." Formation happens slowly, quietly, often invisibly. The crowd leaves, the committed stay. And staying shapes them into people who can eventually carry the mission of God into the world. Where is clarity missing in your life right now? In faith? In relationships? In purpose? What would it look like to stay present instead of stepping away? To remain curious instead of defensive? To stay engaged instead of disappearing? You do not need certainty to stay. You need honest. You need humility. You need community. Identify one area in your life where you attempted to disengage because things felt unclear. Just know that Jesus is with you. May you go with courage when clarity is thin. May you go in peace and you keep walking with Jesus.